Software to Die For, the PROMIS software scandal and how the U.S. Justice Department became software pirates in the name of national security, with Ted St. Rein. Or Teed, if you prefer. Brought to you by ToorCamp and ToorCon.org. Check them out. www.mediaarchives.com proudly presents this material. Thank you for watching. Also check out www.promisscandal.com. We have a lot of problems, with civil liberties. It's become kind of a gray area in, in the entire, hacker / electronics movement. What's crossing the line? It used to be years ago, you couldn't do this lecture. You'd end up dead. But now things, it's almost like they've done it. They have the control now. So who cares? Here, just do your drugs and have a good time. Go out and party on the missile base, and we'll take care of everything else because we're the government. We're here to help. Because we're the octopus. We want to, we want to control it. And so, it's interesting, this definition, or something likened to an octopus, or such as an organization with many forms of far-reaching influence or of control, which is basically exactly what this organization that Casolaro is researching, and others. He's not the only one. And so it's an interesting definition. And so now we're going to shift gears and go to a place out in the desert. Anybody recognize that? It's actually just outside of Los Angeles on the way to Las Vegas. They're on Interstate 10, and it's the Cabazon Indian Reservation. And here's another sign of it. And a lot of people, and actually they built this really nice casino that we'll talk about in a minute, but this casino used to just be like a tent out there, But what's really interesting about Indian casinos is their sovereign territory. And so things that the government or the NSA, for an example, or whoever, the CIA, can't do legally on American soil, quote unquote, United States Corporation, 1897, they can do it on Indian land, especially poor Indians that don't have much better thing to do, work with us. And so a lot of this work that I'm going to be talking about here that went on happened on various Indian reservations throughout the country, but mostly, once again, here in California, for this particular story, here in California at the Cabazon Indian Reservation. And so another aspect of this entire story revolves around a guy named Michael Riconosciuto. There's his photo, and he was basically a child genius. And we'll talk about him more in a minute, but he basically invented all sorts of things. And when the so-called octopus, or the secret government, some people call it, basically tied into that, they wanted him on his team. But what happens is sometimes, you can become expendable, as many people in this story have. But for some reason, he didn't become totally expendable. They let him live for some reason. But we'll talk more about him later. And so, wow, look at this. This is actually a picture of the PROMIS software. Wow. This picture wasn't that hard to find, but it's not that easy. And so they had trouble finding the original because, once again, what had happened, this LEAA, this Law Enforcement Administration, did this contract, $10 million contract with this company called Inslaw. And basically what happened was that they had contracted the software, and then the government got the source code, and they were using it. And there was also several other, some other software here and there. And so, but then the government decided, for whatever reasons, the people involved with the government, I should say, the government was officially sanctioned to do that. They decided they weren't going to pay all the contract. It was like a $10 million contract. They paid some of it, most of it probably, but then the last $1 million, $2 million, they decided they weren't going to pay it, and they weren't going to continue to pay any royalties on it. Because what had happened is that this company, Inslaw, had developed this software, and they basically and they licensed it to the government for use, but they didn't license it for modification or anything like that, or resale, as we'll find out later. That's why in the title is the U.S. Justice Department became software pirates, because not only did they steal the software, but then they modified it on the Cabazon Indian Reservation, we'll talk about in a minute. They modified the source code and then started reselling it to probably 150, 200 different countries and organizations around the world. And we sold it to Mossad, they sold it to RCMP in Canada, who launched a big investigation to see if they had this pirated software that had been stolen from this other company, and went through all the court systems. Let's see if I have any court pictures. But it's all a very tangled web. And people have then made all sorts of flowcharts and diagrams and all sorts of crazy things about all the different Iran-Contras and drug smuggling from Vietnam into all these different areas and South America. And so people spend a lot of time just like making all the connections here. But back to the Cabazons. And so the Cabazons were this kind of just a ragtag band of Indians, and there were at one time only 20 or 30 of them, 50 of them maybe, 60 of them, and they had some land out there east of LA. And this guy Michael Riconosciuto and some other guy named Philip Booth, John Philip Booth, John Booth Phillip actually, went out there and basically assisted them in having them work with some of these covert ops that basically were performing stuff. And so they were able, on that Indian reservation, allegedly, if you follow the current research at PROMISscandal.com, you'll find that they basically started developing a lot of these exotic weapons and technologies that were basically unheard of at the time, and they really had no other place to do it. And so it ended up, a lot of this stuff out in the deserts out in California. In fact, in this day I have another presentation I do on underground bases around the world, really, and undersea bases. And there's all sorts of underground bases stringed between the Los Angeles basin there and the Mojave. There's 4 or 5 of them there. And then there's, of course, Area 51 and the Edwards Conflicts and all that other stuff. But that's a whole nother lecture. But it is interesting to note that, a lot of this technology was developed out in the desert. And so back to Riconosciuto, he was actually, as a child prodigy, he developed something called the A-neutronic bomb. And these are an example of what these A-neutronic bombs do. And they're basically fuel-air explosives. And here's an example of one of the most powerful bombs in the world at the time, compared to, the next step up is nuclear. Those little mini nukes that they have. And so at the time, this was the way to kill a bunch of people and, preserve some infrastructure and, not really, do fuel air. Of course, today, the most powerful bomb is this massive ordnance air blast, the MOAB, or MOAB. Yeah, there you go. And so other projects they worked on there that PROMIS was specifically, and Riconosciuto, who we'll talk about more in a minute, was the programmer who actually claims that he basically was the one that modified the thing. And what's interesting, we'll talk about him in a minute, more in a minute, about what happened to him. But in any case, so using these technologies, this PROMIS-like software, they were able to increase, like double or triple the distance that they could have satellites out in orbit and still be able to pick up communications and pick up whatever. Thus almost, of course, until a few years ago when the Chinese started shooting satellites down. At the time, our satellites were beyond reach of anybody. Now, of course, with anti-gravity propulsion, you never know. And so satellites are a big part of this, a big part of PROMIS, a big part of this artificial intelligence software thing. I found this on the internet recently. I have a blog actually called truthblog.org. Send your national security directives to Pt2of6.com. And so I posted this recently on my blog about somebody who wants to basically develop a GPS tracking system for dissidents that has a killer chip involved. And so if you don't like what somebody's doing, you just press this button and they fall dead on the ground. Of course, now with Strategic Defense Initiative and rail guns and all sorts of things going up in the sky, they could probably beam a hole in our head anyway, based on our brainwave frequencies even. I don't know if each of you know this, because each of our skulls are a different shape. And so the resonant frequency of each of our skulls are slightly different. And the emanations of our brain waves are slightly different. So just like our fingerprints, we all have certain brainwave frequencies that can be tuned in and tracked, So, that will be the new thing, is like brainwave entrainment. Whoa! Okay, so they could kill you from space if they wanted to, but, and so, once again, we have these advances in technology where basically this PROMIS software was perfect for it, because it was designed to go out and do this kind of thing, get the raw data, bring it back, and sort it all out, and then spit out some information. They could do all the other parts. They could bring it all back and sort it out, but spitting out useful information at the time was unheard of. Nobody knew what to do with the information. And PROMIS has solved that problem for them. And of course today we call it social networking, and it's just real common today. And so another thing that PROMIS was awesome at was geomatics, or resource management, as they call it, going out and like probing, Google Maps, or Google Earth, or any of these kind of softwares that map terrain and GPS tracking. All this stuff is basically what PROMIS was perfect at, because this is the kind of data that was involved. A lot of data, a lot of data, and then just a little bit of results. But filtering those results, exactly what Google does. Filtering those results so that you have usable information out of it. And of course, this goes all into different vectors, and it basically is a 6-dimensional software package.
It was doing a lot of GIS along with a lot of filtering, and like it's a lot of analytics stuff.
And actually, it's a good thing you brought that up, because it's not so much the filtering, but there's a great article on the internet, and I didn't have time to include it here. I'll post it on my PDF page eventually, but it's called The Last Circle. Just Google, in quote marks, The Last Circle, and then like PROMIS or something next to it. And if you want to know how PROMIS was designed and how it was filtered and how Riconosciuto did it all, it's all right in there. Of course, it's like, I don't know, it's like 600 pages if you print it out. But if you just, if you just find certain commands in there. And so once again, getting back to these neural networks that I talk about, this is like an example of what a God helmet might look like. And so this is also what PROMIS was excellent at. It could basically go out and process these information from brainwave scans, or fingerprints, or the NCIC database at the FBI, all this stuff. It's exactly what PROMIS did 30 years ago. And so back to Danny, dear old Danny, Danny Casolaro, my hero, really. Without him, none of this would probably come out. He was kind of a recluse, unlike Jim Keith, who would have been out here. Jim Keith would have loved this. I mean, he would have been here without a doubt. But unfortunately, Danny ended up dead right in the midst of his investigation on what he called the octopus. And actually, the octopus was coined back in 1946 after the fall of another, I forget which republic, or there was some big coup where the OSS or whoever the intelligence services at the time had lost some big thing, and they said after that we're gonna make our own organization that controls everything from now on, so we don't have to deal with this anymore.
NSA?
Well, it wasn't the NSA. It was like whatever. It was this group of people. It's probably like in the UFO circles. It's called the Majestic 12. Oh, Google that term. And yeah, that kind of stuff, but levels up from that. Levels up, like not the top of the pyramid, the world king, as I call him, whoever that may be, but up the pyramid from governments and social orders and things. And so basically, they didn't like, they don't like this story. That's why next week I may die in a car crash. But I accept it. I've done my work here. And so Casolaro is kind of an interesting guy. Casolaro actually was heavily involved in the computer field. I don't know if anybody remembers Computer Age magazine, but one of the very first daily magazines about computers was published by a magazine called Computer Age. Now it's known as Information Age. Info Age does the same thing. Okay, but at the time it was known as Computer Age magazine. It was owned by Casolaro. Casolaro helped found it. That was his connection. Without Casolaro, we would not have what is the internet.